Thanks for joining us on the Activate and Illuminate podcast with Mel. I'm your host, Mel, and together we are going to be hearing some stories of ordinary people doing a little bit of extraordinary things. Now, whether they've pushed their bodies to extremes, whether they've had personal challenges that they've overcome, you're going to want to hear their stories. So I will say, stay tuned to the end. That's where we ask some of the juiciest questions. And I would also invite you to like, share, and subscribe to anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. I would also invite you to join up for our newsletter on activateandilluminate.com. Thanks for listening, guys. Today, we are chatting with a man named Dan Behiels. Now, Dan was a former Edmonton police officer. He was a whistleblower, so you may have heard of him. He's a former police detective and whistleblower. He works with the Whistleblowing Canada Research Society to advance legal, technical, and cultural changes to help increase the efficacy of individuals that want to report wrongdoing in Canada. So Dan also offers consulting services for lawyers, lawmakers, and institutions who advance police accountability and whistleblowing protections. So that is a long way of saying that Dan did something at a very tremendous personal cost to himself because he felt it was the right thing to do. So you're going to want to hear this story, you guys. We get into the nitty-gritty of it, and we talk about a lot of things, about the justice system, a little bit about the education system, and the policing system. And I think it's going to be a little eye-opening for a lot of us. So join us. Well, you guys, thanks for joining us today. I am with Dan Behiels, formerly of the Edmonton Police Service. He was a whistleblower for the Edmonton Police Service, and he has a fascinating background and story that you may have already heard part of it, but we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it and learn a little bit more about Dan. And I will tell you that Dan has, I know him personally, and he has an impeccable character, and he is, you can hear a little bit of his story where he was maybe to his fault doing the right thing, and we're going to get to the crux of what that was about. So Dan, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mel.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So tell us about your background. Tell us about a little bit about how you grew up and what transpired to put you in the position to want to go into the police force.
The story with when I grow up, so it was a cold day in August. No, I grew up in a military family. So my mother was in the Air Force and my dad was in the Army. We kind of moved everywhere. We were from a lot of different military bases right from the east to west coast. And I was born in Edmonton, but after high school, this is where we settled. Even with all the moving, I thought this was a nice prairie town with lots of opportunity, and that's why I ended up in Edmonton. Right after high school, I was trained as a computer programmer, and I worked with IBM for 7 years. But after the 2008 financial crisis that's kind of when I decided to re-examine my career options. I liked the work that I was doing. I found it fulfilling, but after many of my friends were downsized out of that American company, I thought, like, what is it that I would actually choose to do, try and do some good? And I know that I'd always been called to public service, and that's why I looked at joining the EPS. And I did in 2009, and then worked as a police officer up until 2021. Like you say, I was involved in a whistleblowing event there where it was reporting some wrongdoing within the police service. And that experience is what I've been working with since. I work with the Whistleblowing Canada Research Society now as a director on their steering committee. And I work with lawyers, legislators, any institutions that are looking for a whistleblowing perspective on policy or the legal landscape to try and help make it better for other whistleblowers, education mostly, but hopefully to make that phenomenon of whistleblowing more effective going forward, because I think it's really important to our society.
Yeah, 100%. So can you give us, 100-foot overview of the situation that you were involved in and what transpired?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think most of your listeners could probably go to the CBC and get more detail there. But Like, I find it boring now 5 years later. I guess that's my perspective on it. But I was working on an organized crime investigation, and as a result of that, discovered some wrongdoing within the Edmonton Police Service. And then after efforts to report it to ACERT and other oversight bodies, I found this was news to me, that there's really no other avenue for a municipal police officer in Canada to report wrongdoing. There's legislation in Alberta called the Public Interest Disclosure Act, or Whistleblower Protection Act, that doesn't cover municipal employees. There's federal legislation that is focused entirely on federal employees. But for a municipal police officer or any other municipal employee at all, to report wrongdoing, whether it's financial malfeasance or criminal activity or anything like that, there's no avenue for that individual to have, first of all, what knowledge of what procedure to follow, but even then to have protections against reprisals, like having your job taken away or harassment within the workplace and things like that. There's no protections there for municipal employees. And that was what I discovered after looking at what options are available to me. And it wasn't until 2 years after I left that the Edmonton Police Service put a policy in place so that the procedure's clear to other police officers that want to report wrongdoing. But there's still no meaningful protections in place for those employees. Canada as a whole is pretty, well, I should say it's abysmal. The legal landscape for whistleblowers, from the federal employees, provincial or municipal, it doesn't really matter, anyone within the public service, there are no meaningful or functional protections for whistleblowers. The provincial legislation in Ontario, for example, or BC, have tribunals that have been set up, but really across the country, it's worse than it is in Rwanda.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about so the actual whistleblowing event, and tell us what you were trying to get out to the public, and why you were wanting to whistleblow it.
Well,
Like, what was the implication and the negative benefits of not doing it?
yeah. Well, and again, for my particular event, like what I discovered was criminal activity that I believed had happened on a reasonable and probable ground threshold. Like, that's kind of the way it works within any police investigation. And the end result was many years, 3 different investigations that were being interfered with, I would say, is the best description there. And the evidence that I brought forward to ACERT and internally within the Edmonton Police is, I mean, there were external reviews of that evidence and no charges came of it. I can say that just because the evidence that I collected led me to a belief about what happened, it showed me that there was criminal activity within Edmonton that wasn't being dealt with by police. And this is more of I think, a moral thing. Like, not to get too philosophical about it, but our legal landscape in Canada and Alberta is based on a consequentialist moral theory. Like, really, it's like, what's the outcome? Like, if I charge a guy with murder, it's because someone had died. That's the outcome. There's a law against that offense. Homicide's illegal, and that's a deontological, it's a rule-based moral application. But most of the disconnects that we have between public and private interests and things like this are normally on that moral basis. Like, you could take any example, like famously that the George Floyd event, caught on video. You see a police officer that's kneeling on an individual in public, and there's a reason you have a gut reaction. Hey, that feels wrong somehow. On a rule-based perspective, like that officer was convicted eventually, but I can tell you there's a good argument to say that lawfully he was there to arrest a guy. He was using force as part of his job. When did it become a crime? Where's that threshold? That's where a moral ethic is applied. And it becomes difficult, especially when it goes to trial, that you end up looking at a moral ethical question where everyone, like, yeah, in my gut, it feels wrong, but on the rule-based, why is it wrong? And how do we present the evidence around that? Whistleblowers are important, and the situation with my particular event is because perhaps that procedure, that investigation, or the prosecution through the Crown's office, or even, and mine never end up going to trial, but maybe even the trial procedure is being interfered with, and I'll introduce that word here, corrupted in some way. And some people look at corruption as a matter of evil, like someone's doing something bad. It's like, guys in back alleys, handing over envelopes of money kind of thing. It's not, it doesn't manifest that way very often. The moral view of it really comes down to the word, and I think it's like poetry is like data compression. Corruption means illness. It's sick. There's something that should be operating one way, but isn't actually operating that way. And that's what the definition ought to be. It should instill that idea in people's minds that corruption is an illness. And oftentimes when that corruption is manifest, it could be as simple as someone stealing money in the workplace. It could be as complicated as an ongoing organized crime investigation. But the point is, it's not operating the way it should. And the institutions that we rely on, like police services, crown prosecutors, government as a whole, it can be very complicated to recognize, first of all, what is the corruption and then what to do about it. Whistleblower laws and policies, procedures that are put in place that way, they work really well when they exist, uh, because it allows that corruption to be at least recognized and labeled. And without seeing the problem, I think it comes up in AA that, if you can identify and name a problem, you're halfway to fixing it. It's a lot like that in government.
Yeah. So, do you ever regret?
Well, I've had good days and bad days. It's been 5 years. I did lose my career. I was suspended first with pay and then without pay. I've tried to operate within the system to gain recognition for whether or not what I did was right. I still think it was. But do I have regrets? Well, I guess it depends on which side of the bed I wake up on.
So, what would you say to somebody that was out there considering doing something like this, or considering bringing sensitive information out in the public? What would you say to that person? What kind of advice would you give to somebody moving forward with a situation like this?
Yeah, well, I distill it down to two things. First, be aware that there are no legal protections in Canada for whistleblowers. I mean, I think it brings to mind a couple of different things for different people, like what a whistleblower actually is. Some people kind of over-categorize it, I find, but this is the way I think about it, so that you know what I'm saying when I say whistleblower. An individual who wants to report wrongdoing that they're not actually victim of. Where I think a whistleblower is best categorized that way because an individual who's a victim has an interest in the outcome. Whereas a whistleblower, an individual that isn't victim to the actual wrongdoing, doesn't really have an interest in it. They just want to do the right thing. And that it manifests in a lot of different ways. We can use case studies, but like Edward Snowden, like he was involved in creating the software he was reporting. And for those not familiar with this case, he was an NSA consultant who developed software that involved the largest mass surveillance conspiracy in global history. It was important. It had a lot of public interest, but he also helped develop that software. So if anything, he was in some part also guilty of it, but he wasn't a victim of it necessarily. So he didn't have a personal interest in it. He just wanted to do the right thing when he's reporting it. And you can think about whether or not he's in the wrong there, whether or not national security in that case trumps it. There's a lot of disagreement, of course. But if you see a whistleblower in that way, I think it's easiest to categorize them that way. So if you are an individual who wants to report wrongdoing that you're not necessarily the victim of, that you just want to bring to light because you see a public interest in it, there's someone out there, your family, your friends, your community at large, that's impacted by this wrongdoing, even though you're not, be aware you have no protections. And that is functional regardless of what level of government you're at. And I would say this applies mostly to government employees. And I say that because there's a big difference between private interest, even though large companies can be very impactful in everyone's lives. It's the government that is, well, they're the only ones that enjoy a monopoly on use of force. So I would say down to. And these government employees, like whether it's CBSA, like the Canada Border Services Agency, or individuals that are involved in issuing passports and things like that, like these are very important key features of our system, ones that we rely on and can be very harmful to someone's individual life. So these people, if you want to report wrongdoing, be aware that even though there might be a federal whistleblower protection law or a provincial whistleblower protection law, functionally it's not effective in Canada. And that's been studied, by the whistleblower international groups out of the United States. Canada ranks the worst in the entire world. And that was surprising to me when I found out, because countries like Rwanda, for example, have had terrible genocides and awful public processes that came to light where people had to report things that were really meaningful and ended in terrible tragedies. So some laws were put in place there. Canada has enjoyed a long, illustrious, peaceful history, and we haven't had to change our laws to protect those individuals that are bringing to light what can be terrible injustices. So that's the first thing. Know that the laws don't protect you as a whistleblower. And second, the only functional, meaningful protection that you can put in place is anonymity. Now, there are some technical solutions for that. If you're computer savvy, you can have a USB boot computer that accesses what is commonly used as the dark web, but basically it's peer-to-peer access for communication. So if you want to contact a lawyer or a journalist or a member of government that would act on your behalf, someone you want to tell about wrongdoing, using those tools would be best to make sure you maintain anonymity. Now, no matter what you do, there's going to be some trace to your actions. Stop and think first. Be patient. Recognize what it is you want to achieve. And normally that is to alleviate your conscience. Well, you can do that while maintaining anonymity, because that's really the only way to protect yourself if you are facing reprisals at work or even physical danger.
Did you have any idea going into this that this would be the outcome 5 years later and that you would have gone through what you have gone through?
Where I'm at now was on my decision tree. I expected it to be one of the possible outcomes. I'm disappointed that it's the way it worked out. Mostly because, like in my particular circumstance, I ended up releasing information to the CBC. And the day after I did that, I reported that to my supervisor, because my point wasn't to get anyone. It wasn't malicious, right? Like, I didn't want anyone to suffer over it. I saw no other option based on the reports that I'd made internally, externally, and with provincial investigative bodies. There was no other option within my decision tree. I could make a flow chart of it now. I remember it. And the only alternative was a public disclosure to actual institutional journalism, which is sadly dying today. But being able to do that, I knew that the outcome would be negative for me. It wasn't going to be happiness and roses afterwards, but what I had expected to happen wasn't based on optimism. So yeah, and maybe that's probably a better description as well. So when I first reported to the CBC and then sent that letter up to my supervisor, I knew one of the possible outcomes was going to be suspension and punishment, because really, and this is something that I've admitted from the beginning, like, I know I did something wrong. I was bound to keep this information confidential, and then I released it to a journalist. Yeah. That was incorrect. I still think like it was the only option that I had. I wish it weren't. But when that happens, I know there's going to be an immune response from any institution that you're working with. And again, whether you're a police officer or you're working with, a local permits office in government, there's going to be a normal immune response to someone reporting wrongdoing. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And that's kind of what I've wrestled with over the last few years here, is that the consequentialist moral ethic that our system currently applies, it's flawed, and it's still better than the alternative, not having an institution, anarchy, right? I still think it's better than that, but it's not the only moral ethic that we know about. I'm not a professor of moral ethics. Again, I'm just a C student who sometimes, reads things about this. But if you apply a virtue-based ethic, it's when you analyze an action not based on the rule set, not based on the outcome, but based on whether or not itself, it can be described as a good action. And those virtues, I mean, we all feel them. Is it prudent? Meaning, are you patient in applying wisdom to the action itself? Is it courageous? Are you doing it out of fear, or you're doing it out of self-interest in that way? Is it something that you would actually apply these moral virtues to? Then it ought to be measured in that way. But our legal system isn't looked at that way. Our legal system is based on the consequences and the rules. And again, looking at all alternatives, I know that it's the least bad of all of them. But recognizing that gap as an individual, as a whistleblower, or maybe someone who has been harmed by a government institution, recognizing that difference, I think it's spiritually healthy, if nothing else, because you can recognize what role government actually plays in your life, and you can put it in its proper place. Not everyone does that. And I know that. On those good days and bad days, on bad days, I've put it in its improper place. I know that. And I think that's what makes it more challenging to most individuals, because we have, over the last few generations, maybe, again, not a doctor of history, but we've put government into the place where it's our supreme authority. And that supreme authority is not effective because it isn't operating as though it can be a supreme authority. So expecting justice from the justice system, which is a virtue, is almost it's really inconceivable in that way. It won't bring justice by itself simply because it's named that. So I recognize that now, and I may not have recognized that at the beginning of this process, I guess. But yeah, I think that's probably the best way I can describe it.
It's a little bit like the fox making the rules for the hen house.
Well, no, it's almost experimental. So it has over, hundreds, thousands of years, our legal system, which is based on the British tradition, which at its time was built based on the Roman tradition and influenced by certain Christian ethics that were put in place there as well. These are things that could not have existed 5,000 years ago. But we compare it to how far we've come, it's just a very slow process. And when you're living in an information age where things are not only fully available to you, but also move a lot faster, it aggravates the problems within a system like this. Like our justice system does need to adapt technically, and the rules need to be updated, certainly, but it's not something that really aligns with the human expectation. You and I might be the victim of crime tomorrow, but it doesn't matter until we are the victim of a crime. That system shouldn't intrude upon our lives. I think most people are seeing that this is happening more frequently, the intrusion of these systems upon our lives, as opposed to backstopping when things go horribly wrong in our lives. I'd like to see that change, but it's not quick. It won't happen overnight.
Did you at any point feel harm? Did you at any point worry about your personal safety or your children's personal safety or anything like that?
This episode brought to you by protandemcanada.lifevantage.com. What if you could turn on your body to work like it was supposed to? What if you could have it remember how to handle toxins, stress, and the environment like it used to when you were young? What if it worked for your pets too? What if this is not about supplementing something that is missing, but activating something that has gone dormant? About actually turning on your body to make these things again. Learn how to activate your body now. Check us out, protandemcanada.lifevantage.com.
Yeah, well, and again, on the decision tree of things that I knew were a problem, other whistleblowers have come forward through the Edmonton Police and other organizations in this area, and they got a lot worse than I did because they kind of preceded the technology. I was quite blessed to live in a time where I have Wi-Fi connected cameras, alarms on the driveway, and like consistent cellular service. So intruding in my life that way was harder for those individuals that were interested in doing it. Now, I did have some experiences, I'm not going to get too much into that, but where individuals would be coming by the house and using intimidation and threats of violence, but it wasn't anything close to as bad as it would have been in the 80s or 90s, for example. Even the early 2000s, like the iPhone was invented in 2008. Our cellular service in even rural Alberta was very good. So yeah, it could have been a lot worse than it was. And I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. So much to unpack here.
Oh God, I'm an open book now.
Well, you are, and I appreciate that. And honestly, Dan, I know that this has been a tough time for you, but I appreciate that you're the kind of guy that when push came to shove, went to enormous personal impact to try to influence things in the future so that they would be better for society and for other people.
Well, and that's kind of that's a large piece to bite off and chew, though. Maybe I might have had that expectation at some point. I'd like to think I was that altruistic, a little more cynical now these days, but making the world a better place. For any whistleblower that might be thinking about it, or someone who's thinking that they want to make a disclosure for the public interest, I think you need to be pragmatic about what it is you are looking to achieve. If you can fulfill your role, I've repeated it a lot. It's kind of my mantra these days, is that just don't do what's wrong on their behalf. That's it. Like, if you know that it's wrong to bury financial malfeasance or a criminal activity or something like that, whatever the instances that you're facing, just don't do that. Easy enough. If they want you to quit to save the reputation of an organization over personal accountability, just don't do that. It sounds simple. It's not easy, because you'll be faced with a lot of different stumbling blocks, a lot of different tactics that are used by institutions today, especially with the way the legal landscape is. But you can simply not do what's wrong every day. And you'll trip up. There'll be times where you get impatient. There'll be times where you get just outright fatigued. That, the reason that certain tactics like trying to wear out a whistleblower work is because it's part of human nature. It feeds on who you are as someone who wants to belong to a group. Like, we're kind of a herd animal. We're very communal, and it's very difficult not to give in to the tactics that isolate you or gaslight you into thinking that what you saw wasn't true, or pretend as though it's not nearly as important. None of those things are abnormal. It is the correct immune response for an institution, and it is your correct response as an individual who wants to seek virtue to not do what's wrong on their behalf. That's it.
Great words of wisdom, Dan. Probably for anybody in any situation. Just don't do what's wrong. Kids on the playground, don't do what's wrong.
Well, and that's where things it's social. It's like, yeah, maybe you wouldn't be going around stealing money, for example. But if someone is, and you discover it and you want to correct that wrong. Justice is absolutely a virtue that you should seek. I get that. It's also a reality. You can't pick every battle. That's fair. You can't go out and right all the wrongs of society, but the things that are your responsibility, where they're trying to get you to participate in what's wrong, I think that's the easiest line from a mental health perspective, from a spiritual health perspective. I think that's really what it comes down to. Just don't participate in that. And I know that sometimes it kind of gets on the runaway. You see some individuals that kind of get wrapped up in a conspiracy theorist attitude. And I'm not, I don't throw that around as a pejorative. I mean, like, if you see one thing where you've been lied to, and then you see another thing that's been where you've been lied to, and then you get told a third thing, it's natural that you're going to feel that, oh, I can't trust that, because trust is just evidence over time. But if you're working through wrongdoing in your workplace as a government employee, you might start buying into that a little bit, and it's natural, it's a human response, where wrong has been done in one piece, good evidence that wrong has been done somewhere else, and then you start seeing it everywhere. Man, that's all internal. That's what you need to guard yourself against. Like, it becomes a spiritual exercise where you try and maintain that level of inner peace, while again just not participating in what's wrong.
So do you feel like you've been jaded by this process?
I hope not. I mean, no, I still, so what would be jaded? I'm still very pro-police generally, and I say that with sarcasm because it's like an individual response. I'll take this back a bit. I'd like to believe that my moral structure in this way is I judge institutions by their saints. What is it that they're intending to do? What is their mission statement? How is it that they conduct themselves when everything is working correctly? I think that's how you have to judge institutions, groups of people generally. Individuals deserve accountability and justice. So that's not to say that there aren't systemic problems. There can be. But a systemic problem is far less frequent, in my experience, than individuals or groups of individuals, smaller groups of individuals within an institution, giving in to these vices, the behavior that is self-serving or fearful or generally incorrect. I know that right now in society as a whole, and not just institutions like police services, we have a crisis of courage and character. We do. And a lot of that has to do with how far we've let our society get away from these virtues and the way we teach each other, not necessarily like our kids. The primary social institution is the family. I get that. But like neighbors, smaller communities working together, we have never been so fragmented, like as a people. You know, most towns, like you have a coal mining town, all the men go together and they work together in the mines, and then they go to the bar and then they go home. Like that is something that's still a cohesiveness to that. We don't have that anymore geographically. So we don't have a geographic cohesion anymore. We don't have a spiritual cohesion anymore. I think that's evident in why we're getting so far away from these virtue ethics.
So what would you say to the fledgling rookie out there that's thinking about going into the force, or just, fresh in the force? What would you say to the young person that may be considering it as a future career choice? What would you tell those young people?
Like, good on you. I'd congratulate them for wanting to step forward and do it, because that's the reality. If no one wants to roll up their sleeves and do the work, it's only going to get worse. The selection, I'm not a math magician either, but if your selection pool is smaller, you're going to get lower quality, bottom line. And I don't want to see that, because I still believe in it. I know that the alternative is much worse. Like, I can count on one hand how many times I think I've seen evil in a 13-year policing career, but like when it happens, it absolutely needs to be dealt with, and having our best at the front line is very important. So first, I'd congratulate them, but recognizing the difference that we probably don't teach in public schools, and maybe some individuals have exposure to, but that difference between it, like a deontological moral ethic, like, yeah, some guy's breaking the rule, but what is it in virtue? What is helpful for this person? What compassion can you offer them? What charity can you give? As a police officer, if you can do that and also be fully ready to do violence when it's necessary, because it's your job. Sometimes violence is the answer. If you can be ready for both and express that level of charity and forgiveness, man, our world would be a better place for sure. And I know that a rookie, they're going to need some experience to get there, but to know at the beginning what you're aiming at. Yeah, I'd like to see that taught more at the beginning, but that's a societal problem. I like to think that, like policing problems. When that in 2021, when this whole defund the police idea was in wildfire across the globe, policing problems are like a funhouse mirror of society's problems. If you're seeing unreasonable violence and you're meeting that with absolute grotesque response, that is society being amplified through a subset of the community. Now, I wrestle with this too, because some of the principles of modern policing were put forward by Sir Robert Peel. It's a British tradition, and it's not that old, really. When the Met police force in London was put in place, it was the first real civil police service that the world had ever seen. Everything else had been somehow attached to a military service. So a metro police service, a civil authority that's actually going out to use force in the community when necessary, it had to be based on some principles. And so Sir Robert Peel put out these principles, one of which is that the police are the community and the community are the police, because these are just individuals that are selected from among the community to give full-time attention to the responsibilities that we all have. Really well written. I think that he was well read. He thought this one through. But from a principled basis, and I'm starting to think this is true. My idea isn't fully formed here yet, but if you are paying other individuals in your community to give full-time responsibility to things that we all share, it means you're abdicating some of your responsibilities. And I think for individuals, that's probably not good. I think that over time, we've seen that bear bad fruit. I don't know what the right solution is to that. I think I've seen mandatory military service put in place in a lot of different countries. Maybe mandatory civil service would be a good thing for some youths. Like, you go and you do it for a summer before university, and you get an idea of what kind of drug problems are in your community and how you can help. You actually see a visceral response to what problems actually are, instead of what maybe just the media tells you. I don't know that that's the right solution. It's not a fully formed idea yet, but I know that Sir Robert Peel's idea about abdicating some of your responsibilities is not a cohesive message. It inevitably follows that there are people that will see violence in the streets, hear someone calling for help, and not do anything, even though that's a responsibility that they share to live in society, to enjoy the society that we all have. Yeah, I'd see that as a problem, and I don't know what the right solution is to it yet, but I can see why we're seeing a manifestation of like defund the police. I don't know how much of that was AstroTurf.
Do you think that's a political thing? I personally think the defund the police, it was a political movement. Do you think that?
Yeah, I mean, I question about whether or not it was, like, the term astroturfing is whether or not it was funded by certain political interests. Yeah, I question
100%.
that. I don't know if it's true, but I do see why that feeling, that mantra, which is, again, looking at it from a poetic perspective, it's a distilled idea that's way oversimplified. But why is it that we do have as much civil authority in our lives as we had, certainly through like 2020 to 2023, I'd say, a lot of civil authority involvement in our lives. Why is that? Is that better for our society? I'm not sure it is. But police officers that go forward, I mean, I've dealt with individuals that are entirely misperceiving the world around them, and that manifests in violence. There has to be someone, a group of someones, to go forward and effectively, professionally, and only when necessary, use as much force as is necessary to stop things like that. And that can be terrorism. It could be someone who's suffering with schizophrenia, and it manifests in violence. Not all schizophrenics manifest in violence, but it does happen. And to not have a civil authority ready to use force when necessary means that we don't value our own lives as much as what becomes a false empathy.
Do you think, like, I personally think, from what I know of it, and just to be clear, I know absolutely almost nothing.
Two of us are
And
trying to find our way
I just
through
have
life, yeah.
opinions, not any real world experience. But from my perspective, when I saw all the stuff about the defund the police and all the, like, so much of what, like, we're not even allowing the tools, some of the tools, to be able to be used. And it feels like we're handcuffing, certain things just based on ideologies and based on, maybe sensationalized things, like you said, through the media and through different things. I just feel like we have made it are so many things, not just police officers, teachers, different institutions. We've made it so that, we're so overly sensitive to certain things that we don't allow actual, should I say, we've taken the practicality out of most.
This episode brought to you by bizbloomer.com. Bizbloomer.com is your friend to small and local businesses, a platform and directory that provides exposure and support to small ma-and-pa type stores or local entrepreneurs, helping them make an impact in their own local communities. Bizbloomer.com is taking the corporate out of business and helping small businesses become relevant and essential again. Businesses can get started for free. Search for BizBloomer businesses in your area. Check them out today. BizBloomer.com. That's BIZbloomer.com.
Well, the teachers are probably a really good example. I mean, I do think that society as a whole is not, it's not everybody, right? But
Right.
we can use it as a democratic precedent. Is it more than 60%? Probably, that are experiencing a real crisis of courage and character. And the reason I say it that way is because teachers, for example, in disciplining children, discipline is not unloving. And we know this. Like, we have it with our own kids. Like, if you let them get away with everything, they end up hurting themselves more. And you would never let someone you love do that. And yet we expect that for our teachers, with whom we trust our children's guidance and flourishing for a good portion of their lives, like 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's not really the schedule, but it works out that way. Is there a reason that we don't empower those teachers to properly discipline students? I think because we're too afraid of the possible outcomes. And I think that not having that courage and trust is a problem, but it's also there for a reason. How many times has it been abused? How many times have these rules been put in place as a blanket response to an individual problem? Again, it's this philosophy that I think I would like to see more in society, where we take that institution, say Teachers of Alberta, and we treat it based on operations when they're going right. What do the saints want it to do? If you have good teachers in good schools producing good students, but sometimes things go wrong, deal with that on an individual basis, not an institutional basis. I'd like to think that's true, and I'll be right up front with you, I'm not sure that teaching is going to survive the newest technology. I've used enough large language models to recognize that they're really outpacing much of the teaching tasks that we have today. So, but our society has to make a choice. We're at a crossroads in that way.
Where would you want to see education go?
Well, I think apprenticeships we got too far away from too quickly. I worked some trades. Right after college, I did some steel frame construction and drywall. And I mean, the apprenticeship is what teaches you more than any book can. And most of that comes down to good masters of trades. We have different trades today. Like police officers, we still have a field training officer that will take new patrol officers out and guide them through different exercises on the street practically. Some trades don't do that anymore. But are we going to be able to keep up with the pace today, especially with the drive of some students, to be able to stick to the old model that we've had now for really only about the last 100 years? I mean, the school system that we have today, the public school system, where individuals, again, you send students away from grade 1 to 12 for 5 days a week, it isn't that old. And I think that experiment is showing bad fruit because students today are not keeping up as well in the new technology. And again, I'm not a teacher, just a C student trying to make it work. But with my 3 kids, I could tell that it's definitely not a model that can be sustained.
So if you were to look at your past experiences and your past jobs, and if you could create the perfect situation for you moving forward as far as your future, what would you love to see your police skills, I mean, I know this about you is that you are, you dive into everything wholeheartedly and you're, a consummate professional in what you do. But what would you, with all these skills that you've had and you've now been, like, for lack of maybe a more politically correct term, put out to pasture for doing the right thing? What would where do you see this going for Dan? Where do you see this going, and what would you love to use these skills that you've built? Because I know this, you're good at what you do, or you're good at what you did. And where do you see yourself using some of this skill set?
Well, I mean, right now through the volunteer organizations that I've been a part of has been really fulfilling. The Whistleblowing Canada Research Society, and I'd like to encourage everyone, go to the website, take a look at the material they have there. The support that they give to whistleblowers is really invaluable. And most of the time that's because people who come forward with a public interest disclosure don't have the benefit of all the experience because it's not their job, right? They're involved in whether it's financial analysis or investigations or something like that. And then they report wrongdoing, but now they're in an entirely different arena, so they need help, and having that level of education and resource available, I think, is very helpful. I want to help in that way. And for institutions or lawyers or organizations that are looking to make more robust whistleblower protections, there's a lot of benefit to it. One of the corporate leaders that I follow on Twitter there, and I've read his books, Ray Dalio, he talks about a radical transparency in organizations and how it can benefit not just the bottom dollar for capitalist projects, but if you have a level of investment in someone and they don't have all the information to be able to really fully informed do their jobs, it only holds them back. And I think that that's a philosophy that has really borne fruit in his organizations. And I know that organizations like Elon Musk, whether you love him or hate him, I think it's pretty amazing what he's done with things like SpaceX. You have a rocket company building the largest heavy lift vehicles in the history of mankind that puts it on YouTube and Twitter, right? And that level of transparency is non-existent anywhere else in the marketplace. And they're winning by a lot. They lifted over 80% of the mass to orbit that humankind has ever. It is an astounding level of success. And that level of transparency, I'm sure, plays a big part in that because they attract the best people, the individuals that want to get involved in rocket science, they want to be at the bleeding edge of something. If they don't see what they're getting involved in, they don't know what to get involved in. And I think that follows. That's not just a philosophical thing. I think that's fairly.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, essentially, you acted as an agent of Doge.
and my situation wasn't entirely financial, but there's most whistleblowers come forward with misappropriation of public funds, and most whistleblowers that come forward with that type of report, it goes nowhere because of this immune response. Yeah, absolutely. And you can look across the country, in Canada specifically, because our laws are so frankly abysmal. The reports that are made end up having zero action more than 95% of the time. And I say like corrective action, like if someone has stolen money from a municipal office or someone has gotten a contract federally and should not have, these type of misappropriated funds, it's public trust. It's your money, it's my money. And yet it's being bled away with no accountability. And I know that whistleblowers are a key factor to that. If you follow Doge, I see a lot of whistleblowers that are being attached to their reports, and that's helpful. I'm grateful for that.
So what would you say is your biggest fear?
Spiders. No, I think that it manifests as a larger societal problem. I know I don't have any impact in it, and that's where my trust and faith go into it. But I think I fear less like terroristic violence than the meek and quiet destruction of our will as a society. I see a lot of kids these days that not only do they not know where to go in life, not only are they getting stuck in maybe the failure to launch kind of category, but society as a whole, without a great deal of accountability, without a return to some level of virtue ethic, is rejecting those that we want from even entering society. And I think I fear that the most. Like you mentioned what I would tell a new recruit. I know that recruiting numbers in Edmonton are very, very low. I know that
Really?
yeah, and the selection process across Canada is extremely limited. I know that the RCMP are understaffed. That can't go on forever. And to say that it's like signing bonuses or better working conditions or new boots are going to do it, I know that it won't. And I think that an organization that's willing to go to some form of radical transparency would see a renaissance of new and positive policing activity if that's what they want. Different municipalities can make that choice. Like many times, the powers of policing are endowed from a provincial legislation to a municipal location. And most of that comes down to the geography. Like Lower Mainland in BC, they all work very closely together, but there's a lot of different police services with their own commission oversight. any one of them could choose a level of transparency that might be frightening at first. It might be something they're afraid of. I know a lot of police officers that I've talked to didn't really like the idea of body cameras coming in. And it's not for the idea that you think. It's not because they didn't want the public to see the things they were doing. It's because they are afraid, it's a problem with their courage, of when the camera goes off or gets pulled off their uniform or something, having that used against them as a presumptive piece of evidence. As though like, oh, the camera got ripped off your uniform, so it didn't show anything that happened. You must have assaulted this individual. That's what they're afraid of. They're not afraid of their actions being brought to light. Quite the opposite, it seems, at least from the individuals that I've talked to. But that level of transparency can be frightening, not because of how it will actually be transparent, but how it'll be abused. So institutions that choose that direction, and not just with body cameras, but even documentation, the transparency that's necessary for the public to have more trust in the police, and the police to be more effective, and for whistleblowers to have protection, that transparency will come with some growing pains. I hope that's not just a blanket statement and that's why people wouldn't do it, because it takes individuals, it takes city councilors voting for it. It takes the consultants that are brought in to actually recommend this kind of radical transparency. But I know overall, from a principled perspective, from our moral ethical standpoint, it would be better, even if there are growing pains.
What was the hardest part of being a police officer to you personally?
My own pride, I think. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that go into any job, but when it comes down to actual life or death situations, it's a very normal human response, I think, to become overconfident. And that level of confidence is an insulating barrier. And I know that a lot of police officers that I talk to, not just me, recognize that kind of danger zone where you know enough to be dangerous, but you don't know enough about yourself yet. And that kind of hits like whatever your 3 to 5 year mark in experience. And it depends how much work you're doing. It's a matter of reps. Like even if you're training for a sport, if you don't get enough volume practice, it can be really challenging to keep that internal personal perspective. And it really does. It is a philosophical job. If you don't have a view of your fellow man, of yourself, that has a good foundation, if you build that house on sand, yeah, you're going to have problems. It's going to hurt yourself. It's going to hurt others. And I think the hardest part for that is that in that career, sometimes it's the things you need to learn. You need to know criminal law, not as well as a lawyer, but you need to know it. You need to have the physical ability and the stamina and endurance to be able to do it day after day, even when you're not feeling right, even when you're in the middle of a divorce, even when you didn't have a good sleep last night. And not make the mistakes that could hurt yourself or somebody else, and not just physical, but reputationally. And that sort of thing can be very, very challenging.
What was the best part of it? I mean, other than just being in the uniform and having women like fall at your feet, but
that is false. Most of the time, I get negative feedback about how it sits around my hips, but that's it. No, I think the best part about it is an actual fulfillment from helping your community. Look, we can go volunteer at a soup kitchen and it's valuable. It's worthwhile. Anyone who's done it knows how it makes you feel. Giving is very rewarding as long as you know why you're giving. And for police officers, I got to say, like the work that I did, even if it was a small difference, even if it was help for one person's life, coming by and helping them with a break and enter or pointing them to the right social services to get the help they need. I think certainly more days than not, I was able to make a difference in people's lives. And I really enjoyed that. I think that's what I miss the most too. But there's always an outlet for that. And that's where kind of comes down to that Peel's principle component where it's still my responsibility as a member of society. So to the extent that I can do it, I try to. And just because like new police officers going into it might be looking at it maybe a little bit differently with some level of fear and trepidation, that is absolutely the best thing. To dedicate, 40 to 60 hours a week to doing public service, helping your fellow man is a great thing. It really is.
So you grew up in the military, went into the police force, and you just hit on something there that I just heard when you said that's what you miss the most is being of service and being part of something. And that's probably the part of your story that makes me the saddest, Dan, is like, oh my gosh. And not to say that it's a sad story, but, to see somebody that's wanting to, be part of something and do something and train for it and then do the right thing and have this as a consequence of it, What other future things do you see yourself getting involved in? What other future, like, is there any future organizations? I know that you are well spoken. I know that you are interested in, different political things, different community outreach type of stuff. Tell us what you can see yourself doing in the future.
Well, I'd like to be involved in some level of political formation to whatever small degree I can help. I mean, whether it's on a consulting basis or even like I'd sell t-shirts, doesn't make a difference to me. But for our political landscape, I know that it can be different for different people. And for my view of what I could do long term, I think that, well, you touched on it a bit there, where the public service that I can provide is really in any job. I think I'd like to be able to educate people who don't know it from a street level perspective. Legislators don't know it from a street level perspective. For whistleblowers that are looking to make a public interest disclosure, I'd like to help protect them from an anonymity perspective. And that's why the Whistleblowing Canada Research Society there has been quite helpful. Again, I like try to offer my skills where I can. But yeah, I don't really have like aims for elected government or something, if that's what you're I
No.
think that's inevitably broken.
So here's another part of this conversation is the justice system.
Okay.
So I see, you guys doing the work on the beat and getting these, what's happening, and so much even at a localized level, local crime, local whatever. These guys are out so fast. And our justice system, from my just personal perspective, seems to have some huge gaps in it, and maybe needs that full level of transparency as well. But from your perspective, is there missing links in our justice system?
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about is that kind of revolving door that could be perceived by a
Yeah.
lot of folks. And I know that isn't a full and accurate view of what the justice system looks like, but I can tell you that the nuts and bolts, the boring part, is really what I like to focus on there. So I put forward some policy initiatives here for government. I hope they go through. It's early stages, but there was a federal law that was put forward. It's called Wynn's Law. It was defeated in 2017, but the idea behind it was really quite ingenious. It used the administrative state, the bulk of the justice system, kind of against itself, and I like how it was crafted in that way. This law that didn't go through was intended that for joint submissions, so when defense and crown prosecutor and the defense lawyer get together and they decide that an individual who's up for bail ought to be released under certain conditions. There could be a lot of things. It could be a financial bail incentive. It could be conditions not to go to certain addresses. It could be as much as like having an ankle monitor, things like this. But this is a pre-trial release phase. It is often put forward as what's called these joint submissions. And when that happens, there's very little, if any, judicial oversight. The judge is more often than not required to accept that joint submission as long as it abides by certain rules, which are very, very loose. So what you're seeing is this revolving door, whether it's perceived or not. And I think it does exist, at least from what I've seen in certain circumstances. It's a pre-trial release problem. So an individual can be charged with an offense, say stealing cars, steals one car and gets bail right away because he's only on release for one. It's a property related crime. And the law in Canada is that the judge has to lean toward release unless the primary, secondary, and these tertiary grounds can be met. As long as that's in place, he ought to be released. Now, if he's then picked up on another theft of auto and then gets brought forward for a bail hearing, what's supposed to apply is called reverse onus, meaning this person has to prove why they should be released. And most of the time, that level of reverse onus ought to go to how much evidence is put forward. Did he actually steal a car the first time? If he's not guilty and he can convince a judge that more likely than not he wasn't guilty the first time, then that reverse onus might be met, right? This is never happening because of these joint submissions. These arguments in front of a judge aren't happening. Bail hearings, more often than not, are done by joint submission. Now, this isn't really consistent. But if you see a revolving door as a regular citizen, and me too, as a regular citizen, I see it especially in rural Alberta, the perception that we have like a guy in our community that we know does all the thefts because he keeps getting picked up by it. And frankly, we can drive by his house and see stolen cars. That's the way small towns work. It happens that these individuals are released more often than not on these joint submissions. So this Wins law that had been put forward in 2017 but defeated by Trudeau's government there would have made it required that an individual's criminal history be read out into the record every time he's being released, even on joint submission. This kind of sounds stupid, but really what this is an administrative obstruction. We're using the state against itself. Because if this guy has a record that's as long as your arm, it'll be, one, embarrassing for the Crown prosecutor who's agreeing to a joint submission when this guy is clearly a risk of reoffense. And two, that the defense lawyers that are putting this forward, even with cash or some sort of condition, are held to task that they're not recognizing getting to trial faster as the right solution for the justice system. And frankly, the judges would have the oversight, because if you don't want to read this guy's record into his criminal record into the record when he's at a joint submission release hearing, that embarrassment can be saved by simply running a bail hearing and having the judge decide whether or not he ought to be released. So it puts people in the right category, because we don't want people on pretrial release being stuck in jail unnecessarily. We've seen that happen, even for political reasons. So we don't want it abused. But for those people who are repeat offenders, who keep going back and stacking up 4 or 5 charges before ever doing any jail time, it does happen. And more often than not, the mechanism of this like revolving door is these joint submissions. So that needs to be attacked at the provincial or federal level. It doesn't matter, but it ought to be removed, or at least some proper oversight put in place.
Yeah. We see so much, don't we? Well, I mean, I know I also see so much of it as being mental health. So much of it as, our mental health and our medical system isn't quite working either. And I feel like there's so much mental health that crosses over between justice system, between policing, between medical system. So my hope is that at some point systems are working together better than they are separately, and that people that need the help can get it.
Well, mental health is kind of an easy tagline to blame it on. Not to say that it doesn't have some component. Of course it does. And I have a view of it maybe a little bit different than some. But there's
Tell me.
Oh, no, I think there's definitely a spiritual component to how well we can operate it as a society. And someone who has no good foundation, no concrete footing to put their personality, will obviously have personality disorders. I think that's true. And you can address it with medication, you can address it with therapy, but if your undergirding actual principles are missing, it's going to end up in the same place. And as a society, like people can see this differently. I like the arguments on both sides because it's worthwhile having a discussion, but we used to have custodial mental health at a much higher rate, which is like asylums. You can look at it as a negative thing because
What do you mean by that, custodial mental health at a higher? So we had more systems in place, or we had more instances?
Well, we had more systems in place, more beds. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, and but for a large portion of the early 2000s and even up to now, we've had treatment in the community, which for many people, of course, you want to be connected to the community. But if I have an individual that I'm working with, and this is from a policing perspective, I'm not a mental health professional, but if I have an individual who's self-medicating with cannabis and methamphetamine, going through their life where they've alienated all of their familial connections. They don't have any regular day hobbies. They don't go to pickleball. They don't have a church that they regularly go to. They don't attend classes. They have no community connections. So to say that they're actually getting treatment in the community is misunderstanding the word of community. What is our common unity? What is the thing that brings us together? Is this individual that I want to treat in the community, do they have a community other than those who abuse drugs? No, then putting them in the community is pointless. You're misusing the word, you're misapplying the actual treatment. Those individuals that would be more often than not, again, treating, self-medicating on mental health issues that they have, abusing things like central nervous system stimulants, like you got methamphetamine or cocaine or anything like that, it aggravates those mental health issues. And they then feed an addiction. It spirals worse, and they require custody to treat it for their good. Again, goes back to our previous discussion about how we would treat our kids. No, not treating them is not loving. Would you let your child do methadone for 10 months or go to custodial treatment for 30 days? Like, what is it that's better for you? And I think these decisions made from a government perspective is removing responsibility for families or community groups or churches or anyone else that is involved in these people's lives. I still think I'm responsible for my kids and I owe a duty to my parents. Our society is constantly eroding that. And I think by government intervention, I would like to see that change because they're preventing parents, for example, from engaging with a child who is abusing drugs. So there's legislation in Alberta called the Protection of Children Abusing Drugs Act that if there's a child under the age of 18 abusing drugs, they can be taken into a custodial setting with an order from their parents. But they have to go get the order. This sounds retarded, and I use that word sparingly, but it sounds like a really bad idea because a has to have a government order to go seize their child away from a dangerous situation is ridiculous. I think that I still can't wrap my head around it. I'm glad that it's there, but it feels in my gut as though there ought to be a different alternative. And I can see that being, again, more of a societal issue. That funhouse mirror of what's wrong with the rest of society gets brought forward in government and enforcement.
Clearly, pickleball's the answer for everything.
No, I bring it up because it sounds silly. More than one person has suggested that I join this like pickleball group in my area there, and I can't take it seriously. It's the name. I don't know why.
Dan, I had this secret desire to play pickleball too. I used to play racquetball a little bit, and I'd heard about some local pickleball as well. And anyways, I haven't quite made it there yet, but I think it's the middle-aged, maybe middle-aged plus. I feel like there's a lot of seniors playing pickleball as well, but maybe we're just getting into that group. I don't know.
I have been 65 since I was 16 years old, so that's the way I'm like. I should play crib and drink. That's what I should do. That's my sport.
So looking all this, like we've gone into, what happened to you and what you were able to do about it, looking at the whole big picture of this situation and your situation in particular, is there anything you would do differently or do again?
Probably down to the minutia of it. Like, so nuts and bolts, yeah, I could change a few things. How I communicated certain parts of it, or whether or not I, put enough risk mitigation time into certain other steps that I went through here. But I gotta say, I feel grateful for having at least some of the wherewithal and maybe the education beforehand that allowed me to kind of see what was coming. Again, disappointed that it's the outcome. I would rather be just on the job, go back to detecting non-interesting break and enters or something. That would be great, but I know that's not a possibility at this point. So no, I think the rest of it would be nitpicking. I think if I were to say that I'd change anything, I'd just have to look forward, I think, at this point.
Yeah. Well, just from my perspective and knowing a little bit about your story, obviously not all the nitty-gritty details, but I would just like to say thank you, Dan, because I feel like, so much of what you talked about when you're talking about system and infrastructure failure is the lack of people being able to do, and you may not have had the impact that you wanted or the impact that you could have if there would have been systems in place. Regardless, you decided to do the right thing at a personal cost to you and your family. And I would just like to say thank you for making that decision.
Well, that's kind of you. Thanks, Mel. Yeah, I appreciate the connections with individuals that I've been able to make, previous whistleblowers that were a great support to me, and I think I've been able to be supportive back, and I like that too. But yeah, I'm quite grateful for the opportunity, even if this wasn't really what I planned when I first joined the service. But it's been quite an experience, and I'm looking forward to what the future holds. So I appreciate your kindness. Thanks, Mel.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us, Dan?
No, I think that about covers it. Again, I could ramble about lots of things, go down the rabbit hole on philosophy, but no, this has been good. Thanks for the chat.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it, and thanks for taking the time to come on and share a little bit about the reality of so much of the situation that a lot of people probably don't know anything about. So,
Very welcome.
thank you.